You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. It was a really busy and exciting last week for me. After hours and what ended up taking days, weeks, the Spring Data Neo4j course is finally live. That came out earlier this week. It took longer than I expected, but it's now available for your learning and review. Also, I'll give a quick recap on a couple of virtual tech events I attended and spoke at last week. Grab your drink of choice and let's dive in. First up is the Spring Data Neo4j Graph Academy course. This is a new online self-paced and free course. For those of you who aren't familiar with Neo4j Graph Academy, it is a place with lots of different online free self-paced course options, all about Neo4j and the tools and ecosystem that surround it. So whether you're looking at just learning the basics of interacting with a graph database, or you want to know how to build applications with various languages and tools, or if you want to know how to write more complex or intricate cipher statements, or if you want to explore how generative AI works with Neo4j and vector indexes and importing unstructured data and things like that, there are lots of options on Graph Academy. The Spring Data Neo4j course uses the Spring Data Neo4j library, and that has been around for quite a long time, almost as long as the inception of Neo4j itself. This community is very highly active and the library is very well maintained, even currently today, both with communication from the Spring side as well as the Neo4j side. Good collaboration going on in both communities. I started this course actually earlier this year, but really wasn't able to devote a lot of time and energy, or at least as much as I wanted, to this content until later this year. And then the last couple of months, I have been able to really pour in a lot of time and effort into building quality content here. I am really excited to have this framework-specific course now available on Graph Academy. The course uses Neo4j with Spring Data and Spring Boot. So if you're not familiar with the Spring ecosystem already, I would recommend starting with something that covers the Spring basics in general, Spring Framework, and all the projects that are included that they provide. But this course specifically looks at Neo4j and interacting with the Spring ecosystem. You need to have some level of knowledge of the Spring ecosystem already. Specifically with Spring Data and Spring Boot would be really, really helpful. The course covers your typical CRUD functionality: create, read, update, and delete within an application context. We look at modeling, we look at building custom queries, writing projections, and so on. There's also hands-on exercises by building your own project. I find this really valuable to have both the conceptual experience and explanation as well as some hands-on, let's put rubber to the road and actually use this stuff. Putting the actual code into practice, I find really solidifies those skills well and helps me utilize stuff better. The course wraps up with a certificate, so you can share that and add that to your skill set and help show others the skills you've been adding to your repertoire, and there's ideas and resources for further development. So if you want to continue your Spring Neo4j education past the point of this course, there's ideas and resources to help you go further. There are also some things that I learned along the way in building this content. I'll highlight a couple of pieces and hopefully give you a little bit of insight into what the course covers along the way too. I've mentioned a couple of the things that I've learned in previous episodes of this podcast, but I really want to highlight a few things in a little bit more detail now that the course is out. The first thing is the Spring Data Neo4j building blocks. There's a whole lesson on this, and it's a diagram that's available in the Spring Data Neo4j documentation, but it shows dependencies, what's included in those, where the Spring boilerplate is, and the config, and so on, based on the dependency stack you might be looking at. And I had understood the building blocks to be one thing, kind of building on top of one another. And actually, they don't necessarily, the Spring Data Neo4j library doesn't necessarily include everything else beneath it. It's just different ways that you can layer and stack the different blocks. And you don't have to have the bottom blocks in order to have the top block. But it was a little bit confusing when someone helped clarify this information for me. And it was something I had to go back and tweak the lesson because my understanding had to shift to clarify and really understand what was actually going on there. If you've seen that diagram before and you're curious what the differences are, definitely check out that lesson. I hope I explained it well enough to help you along that way as well. I also looked really heavily at modeling between the database domain model as well as your application domain model and then the human understanding or data model, if you will. Especially though, looking at the application and the database models. What's really nice about Graph is I found there was a really nice overlap between the Graph database, Neo4j database model, and the Java application model. They align really well, they map really easily, there's not a whole lot of manipulation or changing, and if you've done a lot of modeling between application and databases and so on, you probably have seen where you have a lot of tweaks and changes you have to make based on the data you have, and the database you're working with, and the application stack you're building. Where this with Java and Neo4j actually works out very well, where you don't have a whole lot of those changes. So this was nice. I had to come up with a good data set to really show this, and so I hope you find that helpful as well. The last big piece, which I probably invested the most time on in this section, was the update and delete functionality. I've had several questions in this area from users over the years, and I wasn't previously really well versed in these areas, but building this course gave me a nice opportunity to explore them better and really learn them much better than what I had previously. The update functionality didn't work quite like I expected. Initially, I was thinking that you would provide the object with a couple of the property values you wanted to change, and Spring Data Neo4j would go in, retrieve the existing object, and just update those properties. That's not actually how it works. It goes in and it overwrites the entire object, changing the properties that you've specified to update with those new values, but then setting anything else you haven't provided as null. What ends up happening is you would need to retrieve the object first and then set the new properties and then programmatically set the old properties to their existing values. So it's a little bit more manual work. There are some different ways to do this that are much, much easier. There are a few different ways to update data with Spring Data Neo4j, obviously some being easier than others. As I pointed out, the way that I anticipated, the way that I wanted to go about updating data actually ended up not being very easy to get the functionality that I wanted. There are a couple of other ways that are much easier to do this. One being custom statements, custom cipher statements. So you can pull the existing entity in the cipher statement and just update the specific properties. This also means, though, that you only update the specific properties, the same properties each time, because you're setting those as being hard-coded in that cipher statement. Same thing if you do it with a projection. You would need to specify which fields you wanted to update with a projection and leave the others alone. This means that you can't go in and update property A this time and only update property B the next time and then property X the following time. It doesn't work like that. You would have to specify a consistent set of properties in order to update those, or you'd have to create individual methods and functions to handle each property update separately. This was a little bit more complicated, but I enjoyed getting to learn a little bit more about this and then provide a best practice method to do this, as well as a couple alternate options if you wanted to look at other ways to update data in Spring Data Neo4j. The delete functionality was actually easier than what I anticipated, though. Spring provides several out-of-the-box methods for you, so find by ID, save, delete by ID, and so on. And the delete by ID was what I ended up using for this. It was really simple to just provide the ID of the thing you wanted to delete, and it would do a detach delete, which means it removes the relationships and then removes the entity itself. Very straightforward. I even think this was way easier than creating the data or inserting it to the database. I would say the simplicity of this was on par with just a read of an entity. This was really, really nice and definitely helped me understand this a little bit better. I had anticipated delete and update being a little bit more cumbersome because there's a little bit more risk associated with updating or deleting data, right? It's a little bit more nerve-wracking to change data, modify it, or to delete it out of the database. And so I expected there to be a little bit more gotchas or things along the way. And there definitely was for the update functionality, but not so for delete. This course is live and ready to go as of this week. I would definitely recommend any feedback. If you get stuck anywhere, have any questions, or would like to see some things changed along the way, definitely reach out to either the Graph Academy team or myself specifically, and I'm happy to take feedback and try to incorporate what we can. I'm also considering a short follow-up course on Spring AI so that you could jumpstart from the Spring Data Neo4j and then tack on the generative AI capabilities on top of that. Let me know if that would be of interest to you. I hope to maybe be looking at doing that soon. The second piece of this episode is looking at an event recap. I had a very busy week for events last week, and hopefully we're coming to the close of the busy 2024 travel, but last week was definitely a lot all at once. Both of the events I did were virtual events. They had content from speakers all around the world, which is always exciting and fun to hear all the diverse perspectives and things being done with specific technologies. Both events also have content available after the event. So whether you wanted to look at slides or recordings or just get access to all the things that you had seen live during the events, that is available in either one of those events. The first event was Ep23. They have a few different events geared towards various communities. So they have a Python division and a JavaScript, and of course the Ep23 being the Java one. That's my preference and my area of expertise. That was the one I was asked to speak and really enjoyed this event. It was most of a day of back-to-back content. They had activities interspersed between the sessions themselves. You got breaks or broken up and some interactive things going on throughout as well. The time zone was more geared toward European time zones. My session was later in the day for the whole schedule, but ended up, of course, me being a US time zone was earlier for me. This worked out really well. Lots of great things going on, and they wrapped up with a fun panel talking about AI and technologies and such. Then the second event that I did on Thursday was Nodes 2024. This is an annual Graph community-wide event talking about graph databases, connected data. I had some incorporated things from applications and data science topics and so on. Very broad, lots of tracks running concurrently, and tons of content. It spanned 24 hours in total. I can definitely recommend both events depending on your preferences. I was really happy with the communication and the experiences as a speaker and an attendee for both events. I do hope to participate in both of these again next year. If you're looking at participating in any or either one of these or any virtual events upcoming, the extreme events, of course, will have some for various communities that are upcoming probably relatively soon, but the Java one may not be for another several months or a year. We'll have to see. They haven't put dates up yet. And then Nodes is an annual event, so I wouldn't expect to see anything on that until probably early to mid next year. And then I would imagine the fall 2025 date is probably when that will be. I definitely would look at, if you're in the Java space, both of these events are good. If you're in the graph space, the Nodes event would be great. If you just want other specific programming language days, the extreme set of events might be a nice way to jump into that. Virtual and easily accessible. I do have an upcoming in-person event at the Chicago Java User Group on November 19th. That's next week. I'll provide the link to the meetup in the show notes, but I'll be talking about graph and retrieval augmented generation. If you're in the Chicago, Illinois, USA area, I would love for you to come by and connect with you. This should wrap up my fall 2024 travel for developer advocacy, but I am already putting things on my spring 2025 schedule, so definitely stay tuned there. November so far has been quite a whirlwind with an exciting release of the Spring Data Neo4j self-paced course and 2 virtual presentations in the same week at Ep23 and Nodes 2024. Catch more adventures next week. I'll be deep diving into some things. I hope to have some updates for you next week on that. As always, thanks for listening and happy coding.